The other day, my work buddy and I, as all good employees do, were looking up flight prices online, imagining vacations we couldn't afford, when we noticed this. Coming from Manila, flying to Nairobi, Kenya was more expensive than flying to Cape Town, South Africa. Huh. This is interesting because from Manila, Cape Town is a longer journey, like over 2,000 nautical miles longer. These prices were for flights that were flown on the same dates, on the same airline, and even on the same plane on the first half of the journey. The route that's shorter is the one that's more expensive. That's interesting. To check if this was a one-off, I searched for other routes and saw other weird pricing logic, like this shorter, direct flight from Manila to Honolulu somehow being more expensive than the one taking a detour in Tokyo. This 4-hour Manila to Guam flight being more expensive than the 5-hour Manila to Beijing flight. And finally, this flight going to Frankfurt via Istanbul being cheaper than straight up just going to Istanbul. This flight pricing fiasco led me down the rabbit hole of the economics of the airline industry, and let me tell you, this rabbit hole defied all common logic. Let's try to untangle this mess and look at some of the factors that play a part in how airlines decide to price flights. Going back to some high school economics, you'd probably be familiar with the concept of supply and demand, the two factors determining how resources are allocated in society. When supply is low, such as in a shortage, prices shoot up, like how food prices can go up following a bad harvest season or a disaster. On the opposite end, when there's a surplus, prices can be lowered to maximize revenue from the products already made, such as when Uniqlo sells excess out-of-season clothes at a discount. The airline industry generally follows this basic logic, such as when tickets become significantly more expensive during high travel demand, such as during peak travel seasons like Christmas and summer. However, there are a couple of exceptions. One set of flights we've discussed earlier are the Manila to Guam and Manila to Beijing flights, where the flights to Guam are significantly more expensive than the ones going to Beijing. At the surface, this doesn't make sense, as Manila to Beijing is a route that statistically has a higher demand. There are significantly more people living in Beijing than Guam, therefore, the Beijing flights should be more expensive, right? Higher demand and all. This is where the amount of demand stops being useful, and discussing the type of demand becomes needed instead. The thing about economics is that prices can only do so much to control demand. When gas prices go up, most people don't just immediately ditch their cars and decide to walk everywhere. They get grumpy, but ultimately, they decide to just pay the higher prices because they need the fuel to get to work, to get to school, to get around the city, and to get home. This is what's referred to as inelastic demand, or the portion of the demand that remains relatively the same no matter how much the price is. Let's apply this to the flights to Beijing versus to Guam. If you're flying between Beijing and Manila, chances are you're flying for work or leisure. If airlines make this route more expensive, you could just choose to do a remote conference or outright not go on vacation. Meanwhile, when you're flying to or from Guam, there is a higher chance that you must be a government official that has to conduct a visit to places like Guam's military bases, and your government would pay anything just to ensure that you arrive where you're needed. Sure, there's also the tourists who want to see the beaches of Guam, but with Guam being a more niche destination, airlines can reliably predict that most of their demand would come from the people who absolutely need to get there. This logic gets us closer to our explanation on why flights to Nairobi are more expensive than those to Cape Town. Based purely on quantity, there is a higher passenger demand to Cape Town due to its more established tourism sector and the South African economy being 3 times larger than that of Kenya's. However, when we take a closer look at the type of demand between the two cities, we can see that Nairobi houses one of the 4 United Nations headquarters, and it is the only UNHQ in the Global South. This makes the demand profile for travel to Nairobi be composed more of diplomats and government officials, people who would absolutely pay however much just to get there. Beyond the UNHQ, data has shown that the travel profile of people going to Nairobi is heavily skewed towards MICE, or MICE, travel, with MICE being short for meetings, incentives, conventions, and exhibitions. That travel market, compared to the pure leisure market, is less price sensitive and therefore commands a higher price premium. Airlines like Ethiopia know this and thus price their flights accordingly. There is still one more piece of the puzzle that can fully encapsulate why flights to Nairobi are more expensive. For other types of transportation like taxis, you may be more familiar with their pricing model of just charging you for how long your journey takes. In the airline industry though, this pricing model has long been obsolete. Instead of pricing flights based on distance, airlines actually price their flights based on the origin and destination itinerary. This is because of how airlines compete with one another. To best explain this, let's take a look at the sample route of Manila to San Francisco. Initially, you might think that there's only two airlines competing for this market, Philippine Airlines and United Airlines, who both serve the market with direct flights on their Boeing 777-300ERs. But if you search for flights online, you'd see a whole bunch of other airlines also competing on this route. Korean Air flying Manila to San Francisco via Seoul Incheon, China Airlines, EVA, and Starlux flying via Taipei, Japan Airlines and ANA flying via Tokyo, and even Cathay Pacific flying via Hong Kong. Why the airlines tend to offer cheaper rates on stopover flights is because they want to make up for the inconvenience they cause to passengers. Philippine Airlines and United Airlines are able to set their prices higher than the flights with a stopover because there are passengers who would gladly pay extra not to have to deal with the hassle of going through another round of security, walking through a massive airport struggling to find a seat, paying for overpriced coffee and pastries, and then having to deal with boarding again. All in addition to the fact that your journey could take an extra 5 hours because of the stopover and the longer routing. All these reasons explain why the Turkish Airlines flight to Frankfurt by Istanbul is cheaper than the flight just going to Istanbul. If you're flying to Frankfurt, Turkish Airlines is competing with other carriers like Etihad, Emirates, Qatar Airways, Singapore Airlines, Cathay Pacific, and a whole lot more. However, when you're looking for a flight to Istanbul, Turkish Airlines suddenly knows that it has the advantage of being the only carrier offering a direct non-stop link between Manila and Istanbul. When we apply the same logic to the Ethiopian flight to Cape Town versus to Nairobi, we can see that the flight to Cape Town has more competition from airlines that have a better and shorter path, like the flights coming in from Singapore or Hong Kong. Compared with Nairobi, flying to Addis Ababa is actually pretty close to the shortest and most ideal path you can take from Manila. Ethiopia knows this and they can price their flights accordingly, knowing they have an advantage. Even after all this, it can still seem that airline pricing makes no sense, and that's okay. Personally, the key points I've learned are just the cheapest way isn't always the most obvious, and that commercial aviation is just one of those few industries left that's allowed to set their prices based on how desperate they think you are for their product. So, I guess enjoy shopping for your next flight knowing why airlines price their tickets this way.